So one of the main reasons that James Bond doesn't wear a belt is simply practicality. Costume designer Lindy Hemming talked about this, how she wanted James Bond to be comfortable when wearing a shoulder holster. She felt that a belt would dig into Bond's abdomen when he would twist or crouch with a Walther PPK under his left arm. As an expert in costume design, she felt a smooth waistband would help avoid pressure points and keep Bond's jacket draping cleanly over the holster. Now that being said, as many of you guys know, especially in the newer movies, James Bond does occasionally wear a belt. And with 7 actors having played James Bond over the years, only 3 of them in my research have been filmed never wearing a belt. Can you guess which ones? And did you guys even know that David Niven played James Bond in 1967? Yeah, there were 2 Bond movies that came out that year. But in any case, I'll reveal who those actors were later on in this video. But let's keep going. Why does James Bond not like belts? I mean, he probably doesn't have anything against them, but definitely in the novels and the older movies, he was never seen wearing a belt. Why? What are the reasons? Was it more than just that shoulder holster functionality thing? Well, the answer is a bit nuanced, maybe a little bit complicated, and it definitely has to do with the time and history of the character. So first up, we need to know the history. James Bond originates from the novels of Ian Fleming, and he wrote these novels from 1952 up to his death in 1964. Now, during World War II, Ian Fleming had worked for the Naval Intelligence Division. He did the planning and oversight for 2 intelligence units, the 30th Assault Unit and T-Force. Post-World War II, he got into the publishing business and worked as a foreign manager in the Kemsley newspaper group. So why does all this history matter as to whether or not James Bond would wear belts? Well, the fact that you had a high-born Englishman create the character, it makes sense that he would be written in a way that he would follow the proper etiquette and dressing of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And if you're any student of fashion history, you know in menswear, belts were actually not that common. It was the suspenders, it was braces that dominated menswear, and not just formal wear, but also in their casual clothing. So straight up, one of the reasons James Bond is not seen often in a belt is that he follows the dressing traditions of old school, old money England. Now that being said, from a design perspective, when you look at menswear, I have to say that suspenders, braces just make outfits look so much better. So if you wanted a slimmed up silhouette, if you wanted to depict a spy that would look great in a 3-piece suit, or if you were packing a weapon with a shoulder holster, what would I encourage him to wear? Well, as a guy that's designed clothing, I can tell you that the use of high-waisted trousers made to work with braces are going to give you a better fit, more room to be able to hide a weapon. And so the practicality of going with suspenders over a belt is definitely there. Now, we talked about dressing rules earlier. For most guys, there are no dressing rules because pretty much they always wear casual clothing. But if you go into black tie circles, white tie circles, there are still guidelines that are followed, and one of them is a belt is not used. And in fact, you always have a waist covering. That is either going to be a vest or a cummerbund. Now, what do we notice about Bond movies? Well, you've got the spy, but still the gentleman. If you've ever read the novels, he was a little bit less cutthroat than what Sean Connery portrayed him in the first number of Bond films. But when it came to black tie, when it came to wearing a tuxedo, Bond did follow the guidelines, he did follow the rules, and he seemed to always wear one at least once in a movie. And so, of course, in these situations, no belt. Now, earlier we talked about the functionality. One issue, especially with the PPK, is it does have areas that can snag. If you're familiar at all with concealed carry, you want to choose a weapon that's not only going to be small enough to conceal, but also doesn't have any parts on it that are going to get snagged in your clothing as you're trying to pull it out. Now, if it were to get snagged, best case you just tear your clothing a bit. Worst case, you can't pull out the weapon. And if you were to get it snagged on a leather belt, it's safe to say that would be very difficult to break off. So yeah, in that case, as a snag hazard, I would be careful with a belt. So then how did James Bond keep his pants up? Well, most of his trousers were cut to his body and they were made to fit properly. In fact, if you look at some of the older trousers on James Bond, you're going to notice there's no belt loops. But if you go to the sides of the trousers, what do we see? Side taps, and these did allow for the trousers to be tightened up a bit. And I know for me, in some of the performance modern trousers that I absolutely love, I love it when they've got a modern side tap that simply has an elastic there that just opens up and closes up depending on how much you've had to eat. But seriously, I'll probably make a whole video on those type of trousers, but I absolutely love them and they are so comfortable. And yeah, you don't have to worry about a belt. Now, I promise to reveal which actors weren't seen as James Bond with a belt. And the first one, which many of you guys could probably have guessed, is Sean Connery. Now, the Sean Connery era went from 1962 to 1971. And for many people, he is considered the James Bond. The first movie we saw Sean Connery was in Dr. No, and it was in this movie that costume designer Tessa Pendergrast and tailor Anthony Sinclair, they established the template of pretty much every James Bond to come. Known as Sinclair's conduit cut. The goal here overall was to provide a slim silhouette that showed off the physique of Sean Connery, to have narrow trousers and an elegant waistline. In his next movie, From Russia with Love, they pretty much stuck with a lot of the same details, to include side tabs on his trousers, no belts, although occasionally you would see belt loops on some of his casual clothing. The next movie was Goldfinger, and after that we had Thunderball. Now, it's been a long time since I've watched those movies, and I don't remember him wearing a belt, although in some cuts of the movies and some of the casual clothing, some people say they do see a belt. But no, to my defense, I'm going to say 95% of the time he was not wearing it, so I'm going to count this Bond as a no belt wearer. Now, I talked about David Niven. He was in one movie, and this one was a weird one, so most James Bond fans don't even consider this to be a James Bond film, but it was technically the first Casino Royale. And if we are counting him as one of the James Bond, he is definitely one that did not wear a belt. And the next James Bond was also a one-movie James Bond, and that is George Lazenby. Now, for most of the movie, George Lazenby's character was in suits, and we really didn't get to see any belts here, so I'll consider him as well a non-belt wearing James Bond. And with that, let's move to Roger Moore, the first James Bond that was clearly seen wearing a belt. Now, the Roger Moore era went from 1973 to 1985. And this James Bond definitely embraced the 1970s and early 1980s. We start with some of the iconic looks from The Man with the Golden Gun, and then 3 years later move over to The Spy Who Loved Me. In 1979, he starred in Moonraker, one of my personal favorite James Bond movies. It's just fun. I mean, seriously, when you got a guy with steel teeth that's the enemy, you just gotta love it. And in 1983, James Bond was definitely having fun in Octopussy, and the final Roger Moore film in 1985, A View to a Kill. Again, Roger Moore had some great looks, but he also has some of the, let's just say, timed looks. You can definitely tell this is coming from the 1970s, 1980s. Nothing wrong with it. The guy played James Bond incredibly well. Next up, we got Timothy Dalton. Only two movies here, The Living Daylights and A License to Kill. Now, the interesting thing here is we started moving towards gritty realism. Costume designer Jodie Tillen, she wanted to ensure that this Bond was more realistic, and we see this in a lot of the color tones and just simply a lot of the casual, simple choices. I'd have to say Dalton's James Bond for me is one of the least fun. I'm just really not inspired by too many of these looks. Next up, we've got Pierce Brosnan, 1995 to 2002. His movies were GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. Now, what's interesting here is there are a lot of pictures of Pierce Brosnan wearing belts, but most of these are behind the scenes. They weren't actually in the movie. I could almost consider this Bond as a non-belt wearing James Bond. Now, one of my favorite things about Pierce is that he brought back the traditional James Bond. Yeah, the movies weren't really based in too much realism, but I'll tell you, when it comes to dressing without a belt, pretty much it's very difficult to find a belt throughout his movies. But yeah, Pierce brought back a lot of the elegance, a lot of the classic style to James Bond, and for that, I have to say thank you, and I absolutely loved it. So tell me if this sounds familiar. You don't have any friends. You don't have anyone around you that's pushing you to become better. You miss the camaraderie you used to have with that group of guys that would push you on the playing field, in the gym, at work as you were striving to become your best self. But yeah, nowadays, everyone around you seems to have settled. And in fact, they're encouraging you to slow down. But you just can't do it because you know you've got more in the tank. Maybe you're feeling lonely, isolated, alone, invisible. Let's just face it, sometimes there are things we can't talk about with our partner, with our family, or with our friends. What you feel like you need is a group of like-minded men, a curated brotherhood of guys just like you looking to become their best self. Maybe you miss the camaraderie you had back in the military, a brotherhood felt by like-minded warriors going after something great, looking to become their best self. And let's face it, you're scared of failure. Your motivation comes and goes. Some days you're on top of it, ready to go. Other days you're not. How to be consistent, how to be steady, these are things you haven't figured out. And your biggest fear? A year from now, being in the same place you are now. Your life feels like you're on autopilot. The days are just going by. You're going through the motions with no heart, no energy, no vigor, no life. Well, gents, wouldn't it be nice if there was a program that had all of this? A step-by-step program with clear direction, weekly group and personal accountability, private online community of like-minded men looking to become their best selves that you could talk with 24/7, and the time and resource commitment? We're talking less than 15 minutes a day, 1% of a 24-hour period, at a daily cost of a fancy drink over at Starbucks. Well, gents, you don't have to imagine this program. Over at Health Wealth Purpose, we have built this. At HWP, we got a step-by-step program that's uniquely designed to help you become your best self in 15 minutes a day by taking one small action consistently in the areas of health, wealth, and purpose in your life. As a group, we meet up in a live call every single week, and individually, me and my team track your progress and help hold you accountable to doing what you need to do to become the best version of yourself. To discover if HWP is a good fit for you, click on Learn More. Now, spots are limited. We start classes at the beginning of the month, and I do need to tell you we've got a vetting process. We only want to make sure the right guys get in. So if you think you got what it takes, if you think you're a great fit, go to healthwealthpurpose.com to learn more. And of course, now let's get to the Daniel Craig era. Starting in 2006 up to 2021, Daniel Craig made a splash with his first movie, Casino Royale. Now, for the most part, in the most iconic looks, he is not wearing a belt. He's wearing formal clothing. He's wearing suits. He's looking good. In fact, a lot of times, if he is wearing a belt, maybe underneath there, we can't see it. But definitely at the beginning in the parkour scene, he's got a simple webbing belt on, and it makes sense because of the casual environment and the time period in which we are now in. Because let's face it, we are now in the modern era. Pretty much all men wear belts, and it would make sense that James Bond in that situation would wear one. When he goes to the beach club, we see him there in the polo. He's got a belt on as well. But for the most part, in situations in which he should be wearing braces, he should be wearing suspenders, he does it. Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, again and again, we see James Bond bring in elegant looks, and even though he's starting to wear a belt a lot more often, I'd say it's not a bad thing. We're definitely seeing a shift in the character. In fact, in No Time to Die, and definitely some of the other movies, he starts moving towards tactical. This isn't as much the gentleman spy as it was at the beginning when the novels were written. Now, this is going to be the modern, but still well-dressed spy that in our minds is what we imagine a British commander, spy / enforcer of the crown would look like. So, agree, disagree? What you think of the video, guys? Let me know in the comments below and continue watching. If you love James Bond, I got more right here. I love James Bond videos. Guys, let me know in the comments if you like videos like this. I'll make more, and yeah, continue your viewing experience. Boom, right here.